My stepmother gave my dad an ultimatum. Either she leaves this house and your life, or I do. He chose her. That night I quietly packed my bags. They had no clue what I had already set in motion months earlier. You know, sometimes life throws you an ultimatum that rips your world apart, forcing you to choose between the person you love and the truth you can't ignore. For me, that moment came 3 months ago, when my own father, caught in a web of deceit, chose her over me. But what my new stepmother didn't realize was that her supposed victory was just the beginning of her undoing. My name is Amber Collins, I'm 28, and my life officially imploded in our Boston family home. It all started after my mom died. Dad, Thomas Collins, a brilliant architect who designed half the buildings in this city, married Heather, a woman who'd spent 8 months circling him like a predator. That night, as rain lashed against my bedroom window, I heard her deliver the ultimate blow. Either she leaves this house and your life, or I do. When Dad chose her, my heart shattered, but I quietly packed my bags. What they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this exact moment for months. Heather thought she'd won, but some victories are just the beginning of the end. My relationship with my dad had always been special. He was a successful architect, constantly drowning in project deadlines, yet he always made time for me. Sunday morning pancakes, summer sailing trips along the Massachusetts coast. He never missed a single academic achievement. When I graduated from Boston University with my finance degree, the pride in his eyes meant everything. And Mom. Rebecca was our family's anchor. Pediatrician loved by everyone. She balanced Dad's creative energy with her steady practicality. They were that rare couple, still madly in love after 25 years of marriage. The way Dad looked at her like she hung the moon and stars was what I measured all other relationships against. Our world, our perfect little world, crumbled when Mom was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. It moved ruthlessly fast. Within 6 months she was gone. I was 25 then, working at a financial firm in New York, but I came home every single weekend during her illness. Dad was absolutely devastated. I watched this strong man, who built structures that touched the sky, collapse inward. He stopped designing, barely ate, and spent hours in Mom's garden, just sitting in silence. The grief counselor said, "Everyone heals differently." Which is why I tried not to judge when Dad met Heather just 8 months after Mom's funeral. She was the new office manager at his architectural firm, 15 years younger than him at 42, with perfect blonde hair and a body maintained by rigorous daily workouts. I met her at the firm's Christmas party when Dad introduced her as a friend. But the way his hand lingered on her lower back told a different story. "Your father speaks about you constantly," Heather said, her smile wide, almost performative, but her eyes were cold, calculating. "He's so proud of your work in finance. I've always found numbers so intimidating." Dad beamed at this exchange, clearly desperate for us to connect. I nodded politely, ignoring the warning bells in my head. For Dad's sake, I really did try. Their relationship accelerated at a pace that gave me whiplash. By month 3, Heather had practically moved into our family home. By month 5, Dad was talking about moving forward and chances at happiness. When he called me about their engagement after just 6 months of dating, I was speechless. "Amber, I know this seems fast," he said. His voice a strange mixture of guilt and excitement. "But at my age you realize life is short. Heather makes me happy again. I didn't think that was possible after your mother." The wedding was small, hastily arranged. Nothing like the celebration my parents had shared. Standing beside Dad as his best woman, watching him pledge himself to a woman who wore a dress that cost more than Mom's car, I felt like I was in an alternate reality. Mom's sister, Aunt Julia, squeezed my hand during the vows, her face mirroring my concerns. "Your mother would want him to be happy," she whispered, though her tone suggested she shared every one of my reservations. After the wedding, I made a decision that would change everything. My lease in New York was ending, and my company had just approved remote work. I told Dad I wanted to come home for a few months, to help him through this transition and spend time together. In reality, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply, fundamentally off about Heather. The warning signs were subtle at first. Heather rearranged the kitchen within a week, claiming Mom's old setup was inefficient. Mom had designed that kitchen. Next came suggestions about my childhood bedroom. This room would make the perfect home gym, she mentioned casually over dinner one night. Since you're only staying temporarily, Amber. Dad looked uncomfortable but said nothing. I noticed a pattern forming. Heather would make a suggestion. Dad would initially hesitate, then eventually give in. It was like watching someone slowly, systematically erase my mother and my childhood home in real time. My job as a financial analyst for an investment firm kept me busy during the day. I converted the sunroom into a home office, maintaining my distance while still being present. Ryan and Jessica, my best friends since college who still lived in Boston, became my necessary escape valves when the tension at home became too much. She's just marking her territory, Jessica suggested during one of our wine nights at her apartment. It's probably normal new wife behavior. Ryan was less diplomatic. I don't trust anyone who takes selfies with that many filters. And did you see her Instagram before she locked it down? 3 different wealthy boyfriends in 5 years, all significantly older than her. I wanted to believe this was just normal adjusting pains, that Heather's constant comments about my temporary status in the house, or her pointed questions about when I planned to get back to my real life, were just awkward attempts at establishing boundaries. But as winter turned to spring, the atmosphere at home grew increasingly strained, and I began to wonder if my presence was actually protecting Dad, rather than intruding on his new marriage. One evening, I overheard them arguing about money. Dad had always been generous but prudent with finances, a value he'd instilled in me. Heather's voice carried from their bedroom, sharp with frustration. I don't understand why we need to consult Amber about remodeling the master bathroom. It's our house now, Thomas. Our decisions. The money for major renovations comes from joint savings that Rebecca and I built, Dad replied, his voice tired. Amber has a right to be involved in how those funds are used. So, I'll always be living in Rebecca's house. Is that it? Their voices lowered, and I quietly retreated to my room, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Something told me this was just the beginning. By summer, Heather's campaign to claim the house accelerated dramatically. I came home from a morning run to find Mom's antique grandfather clock, a Collins family heirloom for generations, missing from the entryway. It didn't match our new aesthetic, Heather explained when I asked, gesturing to the modern art piece that had replaced it. Don't worry, it's safe in storage. Dad avoided my eyes during this exchange, suddenly very interested in his coffee. That night, I found the clock listed for sale on an antiques website. When I confronted Heather, she claimed it was just to assess its value for insurance purposes. The listing disappeared the next day. Mom's presence was being systematically erased. Photos of her gradually vanished from walls and shelves, replaced by elaborate portraits of Heather and Dad from their wedding. The garden Mom had lovingly tended for 20 years was ripped out for a modern landscape design that Heather said required less maintenance. Dad's protests grew weaker with each change. Your father and I are talking about redecorating your room once you move back to New York, Heather mentioned during dinner one night, serving a quinoa dish that Dad clearly disliked but ate anyway. A proper guest room for when you visit. I haven't decided when I'm moving back, I replied carefully, watching Dad for support. Heather's smile tightened. Well, we all know this arrangement is temporary. You're almost 30, Amber. Don't you want your own life? Heather, Dad interjected weakly. Amber is welcome here as long as she wants. Of course she is, Heather backpedaled smoothly. I just worry about her career. Remote work is fine, but everyone knows advancement happens in the office. Her comments grew more pointed as weeks passed. My clothes left in the dryer would mysteriously disappear, only to be found damp in a basket. My lactose-free milk would be thrown out because it expired, despite the date showing otherwise. Small things, always with plausible deniability. More concerning were the financial discussions I overheard. Heather pushed for joint access to all accounts, including Mom's life insurance payout that Dad had preserved for retirement. "Don't you trust me?" became her common refrain whenever Dad hesitated. My financial analyst training triggered alarm bells when I discovered credit card statements in the recycling bin. Heather had racked up over $30,000 in new debt since marrying Dad. Designer clothes, spa treatments, and unexplained cash advances formed a clear pattern of excessive spending. When I tried discussing my concerns with Dad privately, his defenses immediately activated. "Your mother has been gone for almost 4 years, Amber," he said, pain and defensiveness mixing in his voice. "I'm allowed to move on. Heather makes me happy. I want you to be happy, Dad. But I'm worried about how quickly things are changing. Change is part of life. You need to accept that Heather is my wife now." These conversations always ended the same way, with Dad retreating behind a wall of defiance that I recognized as partly guilt and partly a deep, aching fear of being alone again. The situation escalated dramatically when I returned from a weekend visit to my New York office. In my absence, Heather had moved my belongings to the smaller guest room, converting my childhood bedroom into her meditation space, complete with expensive equipment and mirror walls. "We didn't think you'd mind," she said with false sweetness. "This room gets better light for your plants anyway." But the worst incident involved Mom's jewelry box, a hand-carved wooden chest Dad had commissioned from a Japanese artisan for their anniversary. I kept it in my room with a few pieces Mom had left specifically to me, including her sapphire earrings that matched my eyes, according to Dad. I came home one evening to find Heather wearing those earrings at dinner. "Those were my mother's," I said quietly, my heart pounding. "Thomas said I could borrow them for the charity gala this weekend," Heather replied, touching one earring delicately. "They complement my dress perfectly." Dad looked uncomfortable but nodded confirmation. "It's just borrowing, Amber. Your mother would want her things to be used and appreciated." Later that night, I heard Heather in the hallway on her phone. "No, it's going slower than I expected," she was saying in a hushed tone. "The daughter is still here watching everything like a hawk, but he's coming around. Another few months and we can move forward with everything." When she noticed me listening, she quickly ended the call with a saccharine smile. "Just wedding photos finally being delivered. The photographer is such a flake." That night, I called Ryan and Jessica for an emergency meeting at our favorite diner. "She's up to something," I insisted over coffee and pie. "This isn't just about territory anymore." Jessica, always the pragmatist, offered. "Have you considered hiring a private investigator? Something about her story doesn't add up." Ryan nodded vigorously. "My cousin went through something similar with his dad's wife. Turned out she had 3 previous marriages she'd never disclosed." Their concern validated my own growing dread. It was time to dig deeper into exactly who Heather Collins, formerly Heather Mitchell, really was. I began my investigation methodically, applying the same analytical skills I used for vetting investment opportunities. I ran a basic background check using resources my firm employed for client verification. What I discovered was troubling. Heather Mitchell had legally changed her name twice. She was born Heather Wilson, became Heather Daniels through her marriage, then changed to Mitchell after her divorce. This alone wasn't damning, but her financial history raised serious red flags. 3 bankruptcies in 15 years, a foreclosure, multiple maxed-out credit cards, and a pattern of relationships with wealthy older men following each financial disaster. Through careful social media research, I identified her previous husband, Richard Daniels, a successful real estate developer in Chicago. Finding his son, Michael, proved surprisingly easy. After an initially cautious response to my message, he agreed to a video call. "So, she found another one," Michael said, his expression grim when I explained my situation. "My dad was 62 when he married her. Within 2 years, she had convinced him to change his will, liquidate retirement accounts for investment opportunities that never materialized, and distance himself from family who raised concerns." My stomach tightened as he continued. By the time Dad realized what was happening, she'd transferred over $600,000 to accounts he couldn't access. The divorce was ugly. He died 6 months later. The doctor said heart failure, but I know it was a broken heart. Michael shared documents from their divorce proceedings that revealed Heather's manipulative tactics and financial exploitation. The pattern was chillingly similar to what I was witnessing with Dad. Armed with this knowledge, I needed concrete evidence of what was happening in our home. I installed a small security camera in my bedroom after noticing things mysteriously moved around when I was out. Within days, I captured footage of Heather methodically searching through my drawers and personal documents, photographing financial statements, and even testing combinations on a small safe where I kept important papers. I began documenting everything: missing items, manipulative conversations, financial discrepancies. I started researching tenant laws in Massachusetts, realizing I might need legal protection to prevent Heather from forcing me out. My lawyer friend Stephanie advised me to create paper trails for everything. If she escalates to legal action, you'll need documentation, Stephanie warned over coffee. And you should consider how to protect your father's assets before it's too late. While maintaining a facade of normalcy at home, I secured my most important possessions in a safety deposit box at my bank. I opened a separate account at a different bank, gradually transferring my savings where Heather couldn't find statements. I researched apartments in both Boston and New York, prepared to move quickly if necessary. Most importantly, I located and secured documents from before Mom's death. Their will, financial statements, and letters Mom had written to both Dad and me during her illness. These weren't just legally important. They were irreplaceable memories I couldn't risk losing. One rainy afternoon, while working from home, I received an unexpected call from Dad's longtime business partner, Martin. "Amber, I'm concerned," he said without preamble. "Your father is talking about early retirement and selling his share of the firm. This isn't like him. The passion projects he's worked toward his entire career. He's just walking away from them, and the terms he's discussing would significantly undervalue his contribution." This was worse than I'd feared. Dad's architectural firm was his life's work. The idea that he would abandon it so suddenly sent alarms blaring in my mind. "Has he mentioned why?" asked, keeping my voice steady. "Heather has apparently suggested they travel the world while they're still young enough to enjoy it. The timing feels rushed, especially with the Henderson Tower project he's been excited about for years." I thanked Martin for the information, adding it to my growing file. That evening at dinner, I casually mentioned the Henderson project, watching Dad's reaction. "Actually," he said, avoiding my eyes, "I'm considering stepping back from that. Heather and I have been discussing a change of pace." "That's right," Heather interjected, placing her hand possessively over Dad's. "Thomas has worked so hard his whole life. It's time he enjoyed the fruits of his labor. We're thinking of starting with 6 months in Europe." The plan was becoming terrifyingly clear. Get Dad to liquidate his assets, isolate him from family and colleagues who might raise concerns, then disappear with his money. I realized with growing dread that I might be the only person standing between my father and financial ruin. That night, I finalized my contingency plan. I would need to be strategic. Confronting Heather directly would only push Dad further into her control. I needed irrefutable evidence and the right moment to present it. In the meantime, I had to prepare for any scenario, including being forced to leave my home. Little did I know that moment would come sooner than I expected. The evening began deceptively normal. I'd spent the day researching short-term rental options and speaking with a forensic accountant about tracing Heather's financial activities. Exhausted but determined, I joined Dad and Heather for dinner. Her latest attempt at replicating Mom's famous lasagna that missed the mark by miles. Dad seemed unusually quiet, though Heather chattered enthusiastically about redecorating plans for Thanksgiving, despite it being only August. "I'm thinking a completely modern approach this year," she said, serving herself more wine. "Silver and white theme, minimalist centerpieces. The traditional look is so dated. Mom's Thanksgiving decorations are in the attic," I mentioned casually. The ones she hand-painted. Dad flinched slightly. These small references to Mom always created tension now. Oh, those old things. Heather waved dismissively. I donated them to Goodwill last week. They were just collecting dust. I set my fork down slowly. You what? They were cluttering the attic. Thomas and I agreed it was time to clear out some of the old to make room for our future. I looked at Dad, who suddenly seemed intensely interested in his food. Did you know those were Mom's handmade decorations? The ones she worked on every year with me. Amber, Dad sighed. We can't keep everything. Life moves forward. That wasn't your decision to make, I said to Heather, my voice shaking slightly with contained anger. Those belong to our family, not just to Dad. Heather's expression hardened, her pretense of sweetness evaporating. This is our house now, Amber. Thomas and I make the decisions about what stays and what goes. It's been our family home for 28 years, I countered. You've been here for 10 months, and yet you still act like you're the lady of the house, following me around, questioning every decision, monitoring our spending like you're Thomas's guardian. I'm concerned about how quickly things are changing, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Dad, you have to see what's happening. The heirlooms being sold, your sudden retirement plans. You've been checking up on me at work, Dad interrupted, looking betrayed. Martin called me concerned. You've never mentioned wanting to retire early before, Heather. Heather slammed her wine glass down. This is exactly the problem, Thomas. She's trying to come between us. She can't accept that you've moved on, that you have a new life now. That's not true, I protested. Dad, I want you to be happy. I'm worried about what? Heather cut in. About losing your inheritance. About not having Daddy's attention all to yourself anymore. Heather, please. Dad attempted weakly. No, Thomas. It's time we address this. Heather stood, her voice rising. Ever since we got married, she's been undermining me, questioning me, making me feel unwelcome in my own home. I've tried to be patient, to understand she's still grieving her mother, but it's been almost 4 years. Don't you dare use my mother to manipulate the situation, I said, standing as well, a cold fury settling in my stomach. This isn't about grief. This is about you systematically erasing her existence and isolating Dad from everyone who cares about him. You see. Heather turned to Dad, tears suddenly appearing in her eyes. This is what I deal with when you're not around. Accusations, disrespect. I can't live like this anymore, Thomas. Dad looked pained, trapped between us. Amber, Heather is my wife. You need to respect that. I've tried, Dad. But have you noticed how your friends don't come around anymore? How you're suddenly considering abandoning the firm you built? How family heirlooms keep disappearing? Enough! Heather shouted. I won't be accused like a criminal in my own home. This ends tonight, Thomas. Either she leaves this house and your life, or I do. Mean it. I can't take another day of this tension. The room fell silent. I held my breath, watching Dad's face as he processed the ultimatum. I expected him to object, to refuse such a ridiculous choice. Instead, he looked at me with resignation in his eyes. Amber, he said softly, maybe it would be better if you did move back to New York. You're an adult now. You have your career, your own life to build. Perhaps we all need some space to adjust. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. After everything we'd been through together, after my desperate efforts to protect him, he was choosing her ultimatum over our relationship. I see, I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady despite the thundering heartbeat in my ears. It's not that I don't want you in my life, Dad continued, not meeting my eyes. But this situation isn't working. Heather is my wife now, and you need to respect our marriage. Respect works both ways, Dad. Heather smiled triumphantly. You could stay with a friend. While you look for an apartment. We'll help with the security deposit, won't we, Thomas? I looked at this woman who had manipulated her way into our lives, at my father, who had fallen under her spell, and I made a decision. Fighting now would only push Dad further away and strengthen Heather's control. I understand, I said finally. I'll make arrangements. Dad looked relieved, which hurt more than anger would have. We can talk more tomorrow. This doesn't mean I don't want you in my life, Amber. I excused myself and walked calmly to my room, closing the door quietly behind me. Through the wall, I could hear their continued discussion. Heather's voice, now soothing and victorious. I pulled out my phone and sent identical text messages to Ryan and Jessica. Operation Backup activated. Need place tonight. Both responded immediately with offers of their guest rooms. I chose Jessica's, knowing her apartment building had better security. I packed methodically, taking only essentials and irreplaceable items. Photos, documents, and the few pieces of Mom's jewelry I'd kept hidden from Heather. The emergency bag I'd prepared weeks ago contained everything important. I wrote a brief note for Dad. I love you too much to watch what's happening. When you're ready to talk without Heather present, call me. I'll always be your daughter. At 11:30 p.m., with Heather and Dad's bedroom light off, I quietly carried my bags to my car and drove away from my childhood home, tears finally falling freely as the house disappeared in my rearview mirror. But beneath the pain was a steely determination. This wasn't surrender. It was strategic retreat. Heather thought she'd won by forcing me out, but she had no idea what I had already set in motion. Jessica's guest room became my war room. That first week was the hardest. Processing the betrayal while maintaining enough composure to execute my plan required every ounce of emotional control I possessed. Dad texted daily, awkward messages that danced around what had happened. Hope you're settling in okay. Let us know if you need help moving your remaining things. We should have dinner soon, just the two of us. What was notably absent was any acknowledgement that he'd chosen Heather's ultimatum over our relationship. No apology. Just an apparent expectation that I would eventually apologize to Heather and things would return to her version of normal. I responded minimally, maintaining the connection without revealing my true activities. The calculated distance was necessary. I couldn't risk Heather discovering what I was doing. My next strategic move was a comprehensive meeting with Stephanie, my lawyer friend, who specialized in elder financial abuse cases. While Dad wasn't elderly, the patterns of isolation and financial control Heather employed were disturbingly similar. Based on what you've shown me, Amber, there's definitely cause for concern, Stephanie said, reviewing Heather's financial history and the documentation I'd gathered. But legally, your father is competent and can make his own decisions, even bad ones. So, there's nothing I can do unless she actually steals from him. Not exactly. We can take preventive measures to protect certain assets. Does your father have a will or trust established with your mother? This led to our concrete action, locating copies of my parents' estate documents. Mom had been meticulously organized, and their lawyer, Mr. Greenberg, had copies of everything. While Dad had updated his will after marrying Heather, certain trusts established during my parents' marriage had irrevocable provisions that even he couldn't change. Provisions designed to protect family assets regardless of future circumstances. My investigation expanded with strategic precision. I located and interviewed two more of Heather's previous partners, an investment banker from Seattle and a surgeon from Miami. Both shared disturbingly similar stories: whirlwind romance, rapid marriage, systematic isolation from friends and family, unusual financial decisions, and finally, significant losses when the relationships ended. She's refined her technique, explained the banker Alan during our video call. She was less patient, made mistakes. I caught her transferring funds before she had fully established control. Sounds like she's playing a longer game with your father. I created a detailed timeline of Heather's suspicious activities, cross-referenced with changes in Dad's behavior and financial decisions. The pattern was undeniable and increasingly urgent. Martin from Dad's firm called again, concerned about the retirement paperwork Dad had initiated. He's talking about liquidating his equity next month, Martin said worriedly, at a significant discount to what it's worth. I've tried talking to him, but he insists it's what he wants. While building my case, I established my new life. I found a small but secure apartment in a building with good security, using a limited liability company as the proxy to make it harder for Heather to locate me. I maintained my remote work arrangement, explaining to my sympathetic boss that I was dealing with family issues requiring flexibility. Jessica and Ryan became my essential support system. Jessica, a social worker, helped me process the emotional trauma while maintaining focus on my goals. Ryan, who worked in cybersecurity, helped secure my digital life and set up monitoring for any unusual activity in accounts I shared with Dad. "You're handling this with impressive control," Jessica commented one evening as we shared takeout in my new apartment, still sparse but functional. "I'd be a sobbing wreck." "I've done plenty of that too," I admitted. "But falling apart won't help Dad. She's counting on emotional reactions, not strategic ones. The Ice Queen act must be killing her." Ryan grinned. "She wanted a dramatic exit, and instead you just disappeared. Classic counter-narcissist strategy." I maintained carefully calculated contact with Dad. Lunch once every 2 weeks, always in public places, always just the two of us. I never mentioned Heather directly during these meetings, instead focusing on positive memories and his current projects. I could see the confusion in his eyes, his expectation of confrontation or pleading unfulfilled. During one such lunch, he hesitantly mentioned their travel plans. "Heather's found this wonderful villa in Tuscany for a 3-month stay," he said, watching my reaction carefully. "We're thinking of going in October. Italy is beautiful in fall," I replied neutrally. "Will you visit Mom's favorite vineyard in Montepulciano?" His face fell slightly. "I hadn't thought about that." "You should. She always said the sunset there was the most beautiful in the world." These small reminders of Mom, never accusatory, never emotional, were strategic seeds planted in Dad's consciousness, each one a tiny crack in Heather's narrative. Meanwhile, my evidence file grew. Financial records showed Heather had opened 3 new credit cards in her name, charging over $45,000 in 2 months. The forensic accountant I'd hired traced large purchases of easily resaleable luxury items. Jewelry, watches, designer handbags, classic value extraction tactics. More disturbing was her communication with a real estate agent in the Cayman Islands, not about vacation properties, but about permanent residency requirements and banking regulations in countries without extradition treaties with the United States. By the 3rd month of my exile, the case was substantial. Dad's retirement paperwork was processed. The house was being prepared for sale, ostensibly to downsize before traveling, and Heather had begun subtly shifting valuable items out of the house, small enough not to raise immediate alarms, but systematic enough to represent significant value over time. I prepared a comprehensive file for Dad: evidence, testimonials, financial records, and a clear timeline showing the pattern. I also prepared a legal briefing with Stephanie outlining emergency measures that could be implemented if necessary to protect remaining assets. Everything was in place. All I needed was the right moment, a catalyst that would open Dad's eyes without triggering his defensive loyalty to Heather. I couldn't manufacture such a moment. I had to wait for Heather to make a mistake. The wait was agonizing but necessary. Stephanie reminded me repeatedly that approaching too soon would only strengthen Heather's position. "She'll paint you as jealous and manipulative," she warned. "We need undeniable evidence that even your father can't rationalize away." Then, on a rainy Tuesday evening in October, exactly as they were finalizing their Italy plans, the moment arrived. Dad called me, his voice shaking with an emotion I hadn't heard since Mom died. "Amber," he said, the word barely audible, "I think I've made a terrible mistake. Can you meet me? Not at the house. Somewhere private. Murphy's Diner," I suggested, naming our old breakfast spot from when I was in high school. "Perfect. 30 minutes. I arrived first, choosing a booth in the back corner away from other customers. When Dad walked in, the physical change shocked me. In just 3 months, he seemed to have aged years. The confident architect who commanded rooms was gone, replaced by a man with slumped shoulders and darkened circles under his eyes. "Thanks for coming," he said, sliding into the booth. The waitress, recognizing us as regulars from years past, brought coffee without asking. "What happened?" asked gently. Dad stared at his coffee. "I was going through some paperwork for the Italy trip, financial documents for the extended stay visa. There were discrepancies I couldn't explain." He pulled out his phone, showing me screenshots of bank statements. Large withdrawals he never made, over $200,000 in the past 2 months alone. "Did you ask Heather about them?" "She had explanations," he said, his voice brittle. "Travel deposits, property consultants, but something didn't feel right. So I checked our safe. The one in my office closet." His voice broke slightly. "Your mother's diamond necklace is gone. The one from our anniversary, and her sapphire ring. Heather told me last month she was taking them for cleaning, but when I called the jeweler, they mentioned they had no record of it." I reached across the table, taking his trembling hand. "What else?" "I found papers in her desk drawer, ownership documents for a property in Grand Cayman I knew nothing about, and a passport in her legal name, but with a different birth date than what she told me." Each revelation seemed to physically pain him, as if saying the words aloud made the betrayal more real. "Then today I found." He pulled out his phone again, showing me text messages. "She left her phone unlocked when she went for a run. These messages with someone named Marcus discussing when to finalize everything, and references to offshore accounts." My heart ached for him even as I felt vindicated. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I confronted her when she got back." His voice hardened. "The things she said, Amber. How I was pathetic for snooping. How it was her turn after watching her mother struggle financially. When I mentioned calling our lawyer, she..." He paused, a flush of shame crossing his face. "She threatened to take everything if I didn't play along with her plans. Said no one would believe me, that she'd tell everyone I was becoming senile like my father did. My grandfather had suffered from Alzheimer's in his final years. A painful family experience Heather had weaponized perfectly. I should have listened to you," Dad whispered, tears in his eyes. "I was so afraid of being alone after your mother died. Heather made me feel alive again. Wanted. I couldn't see what was happening." "You're not alone, Dad," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You have me. You've always had me." He looked up, tears in his eyes. "After how I treated you, choosing her ultimatum over my own daughter. Family is more complicated than one bad decision," I said. "Mom taught us both that. Heather thinks I'm meeting with the travel agent right now. I don't know what to do next, Amber. She has access to everything." This was the moment I'd prepared for. I reached into my bag and pulled out a flash drive. "I have something to show you, Dad." For the next hour, I carefully walked him through the evidence I'd gathered. The timeline of Heather's previous relationships and financial schemes, the testimony from her ex-partners and their families, the forensic accounting showing exactly how she'd been extracting money, the property research in countries without extradition treaties, the legal analysis from Stephanie outlining Heather's methodical approach. Dad listened in stunned silence, occasionally asking clarifying questions. His architect's mind absorbing and connecting the patterns. "You've been investigating all this time," he finally said, looking at me with new understanding, a glimmer of his old self returning. "While I was pushing you away. I couldn't just leave you unprotected. Even when you chose her ultimatum. It wasn't really a choice," he admitted, shame coloring his face. "By then, I was already trapped in her web, questioning my own judgment, isolated from everyone who would have seen through her. Classic manipulation, and I fell for it completely. She's good at what she does, Dad." "You're not her victim," I said firmly. "But I want to be her last," he said with sudden resolve. "What do we do now?" I outlined the plan Stephanie and I had developed. Immediate financial triage, changing passwords, freezing joint accounts, securing remaining valuables, then legal steps to protect what remained of his assets. Finally, confrontation with the full weight of evidence and legal counsel present. "She'll try to manipulate you again," I warned, "to make you doubt yourself and the evidence." "Not anymore," Dad said with a firmness I hadn't heard in years. I've spent my career analyzing structural integrity. Once you see the fatal flaw in a design, you can't unsee it. I see her clearly now, Amber. We agreed to meet the following morning at Stephanie's office to begin implementing our plan. As we prepared to leave, Dad paused, looking at me with profound regret. I failed you, Amber. Failed your mother, too. She would be so disappointed in how easily I was deceived. Mom would understand better than anyone the power of grief, I said gently. And she'd be proud of how we're fixing this together. For the first time in months, Dad hugged me. Really hugged me the way he used to. You're so much like her. Strong, clear-headed, and fiercely protective of family. I had good teachers, I replied, returning his embrace. As I drove home that night, a complex mixture of emotions washed over me. Relief that Dad finally saw the truth. Vindication that my suspicions had been justified. Anger at how Heather had manipulated him. But mostly, determination to help Dad recover, both financially and emotionally, from Heather's predatory scheme. The next morning, Dad arrived at Stephanie's office with 2 large bags containing financial documents, his laptop, and several items of Mom's jewelry he'd managed to secure from the house when Heather was at her regular spa appointment. She doesn't know I suspect anything, he confirmed. She thinks I'm meeting with Martin about finalizing the firm's sale. Stephanie walked us through immediate protective measures. Dad called the bank from her office, implementing security freezes on joint accounts and changing access credentials for his personal accounts. We documented the remaining jewelry and heirlooms with photographs and appraisal records. Most importantly, Dad signed powers of attorney giving me emergency authority if Heather attempted retaliatory legal action. The goal isn't just to stop her from taking more, Stephanie explained. It's to create a legally defensible case for recovering what she's already taken. By afternoon, the immediate financial hemorrhaging was contained. The next phase would be more challenging. The confrontation and legal separation. Stephanie advised against Dad returning to the house alone. She'll be desperate once she realizes her access is cut off, she warned. Desperate people are unpredictable. Dad nodded grimly. I've already packed essentials in my car. I can stay at the residence near my office until this is resolved. As we finalized plans for the coming days, Dad's phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Heather, increasingly urgent messages asking about bank access issues she was encountering. It's beginning, Stephanie observed. Are you ready for this, Thomas? Dad looked at the evidence files we'd compiled, then at me, and finally at the wedding ring he just removed from his finger. More ready than I've been in a long time, he said, his voice steady with resolve. Let's end this. The confrontation with Heather unfolded like a carefully orchestrated chess match. With Stephanie's guidance, we arranged a meeting at her office rather than our home, citing urgent paperwork requiring immediate attention. Heather arrived expecting to charm her way through whatever minor issue had arisen with the banking confusion. Her confident smile faltered when she entered the conference room to find not only Dad and me, but also Stephanie and her paralegal, along with detailed financial records spread across the table. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice maintaining its sweetness while her eyes darted calculatingly around the room. "Please sit down, Mrs. Collins," Stephanie said professionally. "We need to discuss some serious financial discrepancies." What followed was a masterclass in denial, deflection, and manipulation. As Stephanie methodically presented evidence of unauthorized transfers, hidden accounts, and systematic theft, Heather cycled through multiple strategies. Confusion, outrage, tears, and finally, when those failed, vicious accusations. "This is your doing," she hissed at me. "You've never accepted me. You've poisoned your father against me out of jealousy." Dad, who had remained silent during the initial presentation, finally spoke. The offshore account in Grand Cayman was Amber's idea. The passport. The missing heirlooms listed for sale online. "Thomas, you can't believe these lies," Heather pleaded, reaching for his hand. "We have plans, a future together. Don't throw that away over misunderstandings. The only misunderstanding was my belief in who you were, Dad replied, pulling his hand away. It's over, Heather. The meeting concluded with Stephanie serving Heather divorce papers and a court order freezing assets pending investigation. Heather left without the dramatic scene I expected. Her face a mask of cold calculation that was perhaps more disturbing than anger would have been. This isn't finished, she said quietly before walking out. You have no idea what you've done. Her final threat proved empty. The legal proceedings that followed were methodical and decisive. The evidence was overwhelming, particularly when combined with testimony from previous victims who came forward once legal proceedings began. The district attorney's office even opened a fraud investigation based on the pattern of behavior across multiple states. Recovery of assets proved more challenging. Much of the money Heather had diverted was gone, spent on luxury items that had already been resold or transferred to accounts that proved difficult to trace. Dad's retirement savings had taken a significant hit, though the trusts established with Mom remained protected thanks to their irrevocable status. The family home, which had been days away from listing for sale, remained ours, though it took months before Dad could bear to move back in. In the interim, he stayed in my spare bedroom in my new apartment. Our roles reversed as I helped him process the betrayal and rebuild his confidence. I keep thinking about the signs I missed, he confessed one evening as we sorted through boxes of Mom's things we'd managed to recover from storage. The inconsistencies in her stories, the way she isolated me so gradually. I didn't notice until I was completely alone. Manipulation at that level is insidious, I reminded him. She was practiced at it. You're not the person she deceived, and you wouldn't have been the last if we hadn't stopped her. Physical recovery of our home proved easier than emotional recovery. We spent weekends restoring Mom's touches to the house, rehanging her artwork, replacing family photos, replanting her garden with her favorite perennials. Each act felt like reclaiming not just our space, but our connection to her memory that Heather had tried to erase. Dad started therapy, working through not only the trauma of Heather's betrayal, but also the unresolved grief over Mom's death that had left him vulnerable to manipulation. The progress was slow but steady, marked by small victories like the day he laughed genuinely for the first time in months, or when he called Martin to discuss returning to work on a consulting basis. Our Sunday dinner tradition was re-established, sometimes at home and sometimes at Mom's favorite local restaurants. During one such dinner, about 6 months after Heather's departure, Dad raised his glass in a toast. "To my brilliant, stubborn daughter who saved me from myself," he said. His eyes clear and present in a way they hadn't been even before Heather. "And to Rebecca, who somehow managed to raise a daughter strong enough to stand her ground even when I couldn't." "I learned from the best," I replied, clinking my glass against his. "Both of you." In a surprising development, I formed connections with several of Heather's previous victims and their families. What began as information gathering evolved into a support network and eventually an advocacy group focused on raising awareness about financial exploitation in relationships. Michael Daniels, Richard's son from Chicago, became particularly involved, using his legal background to help strengthen protections for vulnerable individuals. Dad's healing continued in unexpected ways. He gradually reconnected with friends Heather had pushed away, rebuilt his professional network, and even after a year had passed, began tentatively dating again. This time, with a level of caution and awareness that was healthy rather than fearful. "I'm having coffee with Catherine from the Hospital Foundation Board," he mentioned casually one day. "Just as friends, but it's nice to have conversations again." "Mom would approve," I told him sincerely. "She always said you were too special to ever be alone." As for me, the experience transformed my perspective on both family dynamics and my professional path. I remained in Boston, accepting a promotion that allowed me to maintain my roots while advancing my career. The skills I developed during the investigation led me to specialize in fraud detection within my financial firm, helping others identify and prevent similar schemes. The final chapter of Heather's story arrived unexpectedly in an email from the district attorney's office 18 months after our confrontation. She had been arrested in Arizona for attempting a similar scheme with a retired surgeon. But this time, her potential victim had seen warning signs, partly due to an awareness campaign our advocacy group had launched in cooperation with senior financial protection organizations. "Your work made a difference," the assistant DA wrote. "The surgeon's daughter had attended one of your workshops and recognized the pattern immediately. That evening, Dad and I sat in Mom's garden watching the sunset over the trees she had planted decades earlier. Do you think we were naive?" I asked, looking at him. Dad considered the question thoughtfully. "Not naive, perhaps too trusting, which isn't entirely a bad thing. The world needs trust to function, but now we balance that trust with awareness. Like Mom's favorite saying about bridges," I smiled. "Designed for beauty, but built for strength." "Exactly," Dad nodded, his expression peaceful. "The experience was painful, but I wouldn't trade the wisdom it brought us, or the way it brought us closer together." As darkness fell and the stars appeared, I reflected on the journey we'd navigated. Heather had intended to destroy our family and nearly succeeded. Instead, she had inadvertently strengthened bonds that could never be broken by ultimatums or manipulation. In trying to force Dad to choose between us, she had actually ensured that he would eventually choose what truly mattered: family, integrity, and the authentic connection that no scheme, however clever, could permanently sever. The experience taught me that sometimes the most powerful response to manipulation isn't direct confrontation, but strategic patience. By stepping back rather than fighting on Heather's terms, I had created space for truth to emerge in its own time. It wasn't surrender, but rather a different kind of strength. The kind that can wait, observe, document, and then act decisively when the moment is right. Today, as I share this story, I wonder how many others might be experiencing similar situations without recognizing the warning signs. Has someone in your life been isolated from friends and family? Have you noticed sudden financial decisions that seem out of character? Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. They're often trying to protect you from dangers your conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet. I'd love to hear your thoughts or experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had to make a difficult strategic retreat to ultimately win an important battle? How did you navigate complex family dynamics during a crisis? Your insights might help someone else who's struggling with similar challenges. If you found value in my story, please like and subscribe to support the channel and share with anyone who might benefit from these lessons. Remember that sometimes the strongest choice isn't fighting back immediately, but rather preparing wisely and choosing the right moment to stand your ground. Thank you for listening to my journey. Sometimes life's hardest challenges reveal strengths we never knew we had, and connections that can never truly be broken.